book nerds. I'm Aubrey.
And I'm Peyton.
And today we are going to be giving our thoughts on GoodReads' top 10 fantasy books of 2022.
So, join us with a cup of coffee as we dive between these paper sheets.
All right, starting with number 10 on this list, we have The Golden Enclaves coming in with around 19,000 votes. This is the third book in the trilogy that starts with A Deadly Education. I have not read this book.
I have not either.
But you know what? I see A Deadly Education at Barnes and Nobles all the time, and it's been one of those books that I pick up and I'm like, oh, it's so pretty, and I carry it around the store with me. But then by the end of this, I'm walking around the store, I have 5 other books in my hands, and it's always one that gets put back on the shelf because your girl can't buy 5 books every time I go to Barnes and Nobles. It would kill me.
I have the same problem, but similar to the Atlas 6, the covers kind of give off the same dark academia vibes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely on our TBR. Yeah. It's on my TBR, but I'm just have not read this.
It's not the top,
yeah, it's not the top, but
it's there.
It's there. It'll happen eventually. All right, let's jump into our next book with 21,294 votes. This is one of Aubrey's favorites, Brandon Sanderson's The Lost Medal.
Yes, and you know what? Here's my thing. I have not read The Lost Medal. And I think that if in 2022 a Stormlight Archive book, one of his bigger series books came out, I think it would have been much higher. The Lost Medal is part of a different series, and it's a sequel series or the third series. I don't know. I haven't read Mistborn stuff. But that's why I think that it's actually really low for Brandon Sanderson. And I think my man could be up a lot higher if a different book had come out in 2022.
Okay. All right. I like it. Let's jump into our next one, which could be controversial.
Okay. Legends and Lattes with 26,000 votes. I have not read this book, but I love it. It is so high on my TBR. It's just a little cozy fantasy, and I think that it's so cute. I follow TikTokers all the time who talk about cozy fantasy books, and I'm
Yes.
I'm obsessed with that. Just a nice, fun little story, but in a fantasy setting,
And there's something about the title Legends and Lattes that I'm that's cute. I've seen this on the book talk table at Barnes and Noble. And I will say the cover is something I would never have on my shelf. So I was that's interesting. But what I think it goes along with the cozy fantasy, and cozy fantasy is something I've recently just been trying to learn a lot about. Because I feel I'm always fantasy, let's get into it. Whereas it's you know what, it could be nice just to ease into something a fun read that is still fantasy. So
your cooler read could be a fantasy read still. You know, if you go from an epic fantasy to an epic fantasy, you have to read a short little book in between so you don't lose momentum. This could be your next cooler read.
Yes. So we'll see. Maybe I'll add this to my TBR. All right, let's jump into our next book. We're going up in votes a little bit here, 30,000. Yes. And this is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches.
Okay.
That's a mouthful.
Yes. I think this is another cozy fantasy. This is one that I also haven't heard a ton of, but I've definitely seen before. It's supposed to be very whimsical and cute, and I'm pretty sure it's completely a romance story, which I love. You know, just fun little vibes.
Yes, and you know what I'm seeing here on this list so far is that with these last 2 books, Legends and Lattes and this mouthful, this witch's book, is that maybe these are top ranked because a cozy fantasy with that romance and just a chill read, maybe that's easier for people to read and less daunting.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a good introduction to fantasy, and maybe why they are going to be ranked higher on a list versus a very complex fantasy read.
And you know what I'm thinking about is the fact that the GoodReads system is set up by votes. And so this is all just like people choosing like what books to vote for, and you could have never read a book and voted for it. And I'm not saying that these aren't really good books. I don't know if I think that all of these books should have been the top 10 for the
Yeah.
fantasy category, but books like Legends and Lattes and The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which are more cozy fantasy, are not what we typically see with like if I'm talking about like the 5-star fantasy books, it's gonna be the epic fantasies because that's what the genre is built for. But if a bunch of
Correct.
romance readers happen to read this one or two, if mystery readers or romance readers who don't generally read fantasy read these smaller books, when they go to vote, they're going to be like, oh, well, I've read one of these, so I'm going to vote for this one. And maybe that's why these are up here. Not to say, like, I think that they could be great books. I mean, Legends and Lattes, I'm so excited to read. I don't think that it's like fantasy. Like if these
Yeah.
are the best 10 fantasy books of 2022, I would expect to see epic and grimdark and high and maybe not
Yeah.
as much cozy and romance.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. All right, let's jump to our next one.
Yes, moving forward, we have Daughter of the Moon Goddess with 33,000 votes. This cover is so gorgeous, like so so pretty, and the sequel is out already, I'm pretty sure. And its cover is also gorgeous. This is another one where I have not read, but I love to look.
Yes, this cover is so pretty. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I've actually never heard of this book until I saw it on this list, and I was like, oh, like it's one of those books I'm gonna keep my eyes out for. And just this cover design is so beautiful, and even the vibe of the Daughter of the Moon Goddess. Like I just feel so much like woman empowerment coming through with that title, and I love that. So I am going to keep my eye out on that.
And I'm expecting it to be a pretty storybook, like prosy thing. Like just looking at the cover, like this is, I could be completely wrong, but this feels like a prosy read. And I could do a prosy read.
We could do a little prose. Let's jump into it. Yes, love it. Love. So
the opposite of a prosy read is this next book.
Which we both have read with almost 35,000 votes. We have The War of Two Queens by JLA. So wow, this book, like I said, we've both read. We have a lot to say about this. I'm sure we'll do a whole podcast on it one day.
Yeah.
Aubrey, thoughts? Okay.
Here's my thing. Is the From Blood and Ash series, I hold very near and dear. I think it's fun. I love it. I love the plot. I love the chaoticness of it. Is this a particularly well-written book? No. Am I a firm believer that JLA does not have an editor? Yes. But, if you can get all of these people to read your book and, emphasize with the characters, then that's great. If you're writing purely romance fantasy and you're going to write a book about a war and you're not very good about writing wars, maybe we could have gone in a different path, but epic fantasy has wars in it.
Yeah. Yes. And also like for me, this is, I mean, there's so many books coming out in the coming year for this whole series, but right now, this is one of the last books in the series. And if you make it to that point, like you're pretty committed by then. So like you're going to read it, but from a reader's point of view, the writing really drops off. And I know a lot of people that have read this book and they all say the same thing. So I love the series, don't necessarily love this book.
Yeah, not this one. And I think that if this one had been different, like if it had been a different book from the series, like the third book, or I love the second book's ending is my favorite book ending. ever.
Yes.
And like I think one of those would be so much higher on this list, but my girl did not write a very good war book. And I read a lot of this book and I was like, what the fuck are we doing? And someone very important is missing from a majority of this book. And I think that hurt it.
So take that for what it is. I hope we'll do a podcast on it someday so we can jump into all the juicy details and our thoughts. But for now,
a number 5 slot isn't bad for it. It is one where I'm like, no, it deserves the number 5 spot, even if I want to hate on it. Like, what this world and this series is to fantasy readers deserves a number 5 spot.
I would agree with that.
Moving forward to number 4 with 57,000 votes, we have the Atlas 6. Which Peyton and I just gave our full review on last week. So you can go back and watch that video if you haven't already to know all of our thoughts. But yeah, we both have read this book. Loved it. Peyton?
Yeah, honestly, like, I think Olivia Blake deserves a spot on this list. This book may not be for everyone, but it's for most people. Yeah. As we said before, like, very prosy writing. She writes like she's Shakespeare, so just know that going into it. But strong academia, dark academia vibes. It gives you it all. And so I have nothing more to say because we did a whole podcast on it. So this is a good point to, after this video, go watch that to know our full feelings and review on the book. But yeah, I think this deserves this spot.
Yeah. It is fun for me to have this book in the 2022 reads because I read it in 2021 because I read the self-published version like right before it went off the shelves.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Her story of how this got up and like this is very much a TikTok book. Like I think a lot of her business success. Not that Olivia Blake isn't a tremendous writer and that it's not a good book, but the fact that it went so viral on TikTok, I think is how she gained this number 4 spot.
Oh yeah, well deserved. And may I add, she is next to one of the best writers of our time.
Yes,
Stephen King's fairy tale. Who would have thought? Like when I was in Barnes & Noble, I looked down and I see a Stephen King book in the fantasy section.
Yeah.
I was like, Stephen!
Who clearly also gained all of his fame from TikTok. I mean, what a TikTok influencer.
What a TikTok. His beginnings were on TikTok, may I add.
Don't fact check me. Believe me.
Stephen King got his start on TikTok. That is... He's next to all these TikTok books. I mean, here we are. But yeah, so I have not read this book, but I kind of want to.
I want to so bad. I don't think I have read actually one Stephen King book before in my life. I don't really remember it that much because it was a while ago. But I mean, come on. If he's gonna write a fantasy book, I'm gonna read it. Like,
I know. It's like I'm not to bring Shakespeare to this. It's like Shakespeare popping off with a new book all of a sudden. It's like, oh, he's out of the grave. Like, Stephen King growing up, it's like, oh, like those are older books. Those are older books. So
you know Stephen King, the TikToker star, recently resurrected from the grave author.
Yes. But listen, Stephen King, this is how I picture him to this day, is like on a coast by himself in like a dark room writing a book. Like that is Stephen King to me today. And even when he does die, I think no one's going to know because his books will still be published.
Yeah, him and James Patterson, they're just...
Yeah, yes, James Patterson. Yes, exactly. Stephen King is the king, and I just am so happy to see that he like kind of shifted here with the genre. I mean, his stuff has always been fantasy-esque because it's I think he just has such a wild imagination that it kind of like feeds into that. But him going full fantasy in this book is super exciting.
Yeah.
When it came out, I had a lot of talks with people, and they're like, Stephen King? I'm like, yes! And he is getting like a revival because there are a lot of girls our age that are picking up Stephen King books. I know like famous book talker and booktuber Haley Pham. She's like obsessed with Stephen King now. And so I do feel like we're going to get a like surge of Stephen King on our TBR lists this year. So look out for that.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And I think all of books in general have been in such a resurgence since the pandemic that like I'm excited to see where these authors who like, you know, couldn't do as much beforehand, and now like Book Talk was brought up in the congressional hearing about whether or not they should ban TikTok. You know what I mean? Like we have become such a large, part of life to see like how this shakes up. Like what is the 2023 reading list going to look like? Because I bet you could find like new authors on there. I think it's going to look a lot different. And I think that especially the book in the number 1 spot would not have been so high on the number 1 spot if it wasn't for Book Talk. But before we get there, we have with 62,000 votes, Babel. I have read this book.
I have not read this book. It is on my TBR. I was a little turned away from it because I actually, after the Atlas 6, after I read that, I was kind of burnt out on the like intellectual. Like I just wanted to read something for enjoyment and not like think too hard about it. And I know this book can get that way.
This book, you need to be like thinking. Like I have not and will not read nonfiction. This is the closest I probably will ever come to reading nonfiction, which is wild to say for a fantasy book. But you're definitely like learning as you're reading, and I think that's a strength of her skill. But it's definitely there. Babel has such a unique magic system. It is set in Oxford with the Babel Tower, except like the magic is like intertwined with the language, and like all throughout you were learning about language, and it's so beautifully paced. It is beautifully written. It is so much to process and to read. This is a slow book. This is a book that took me, I think, over a month to read. Now, I'm not a particularly fast reader, but it felt long reading this book. But I think it deserves a number. Well, I don't know. I might have put it a little lower, but I think it definitely deserves to be on this list. It is a very powerful. It tells a very important story. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a big book. She's chonky. She's got a lot going on with her. It's dark academia, prosy language.
We will see if I ever conquer it. I'm just like, oh my god, I don't want to read a textbook. But I mean, hey, I think it's cool because we talked about the cozy fantasy at the more bottom end of this list. So to see a book that is hard to read, even for a seasoned reader like yourself, for many people to give it 62,000 votes to get to the number 2 spot, like, whoa, well deserved.
Well, and it is a really good book. As much as I'm going to prepare you for it, she also wrote the Poppy War trilogy, which I'm terrified to read because I'm a wimp and I'm so scared that because I have heard that it is gruesome and dark and very well done and executed. And from seeing her writing style, I can see that if she wanted to go gruesome and dark, my girl could nail it. And so I'm terrified. Poppy War is definitely on my reading list as well. But I will say, I think part of the reason that it's so high is that this book came out in like September, October-ish time. And so if you're voting on the best 2022 books in late December, early January, or whenever we vote for them, and this book just came out, it was super popular on TikTok when it came out. I think it's really fresh in people's minds compared to books that might have came out earlier in the year. Not to say that she doesn't deserve her spot, but I think that might have factored into it.
Oh yeah, 100%. And this book was very popular on TikTok. That's how I first heard about it. And then I mean, this cover is just like
So
the
pretty.
cover is so pretty. It's so pretty.
Mm-hmm.
But with that being said, it is time for our number one of 2022. And as I said before, Babel had 62,000 votes, almost 63,000 votes. This book at our number one has 105,000 votes, closer to 106,000 votes. Okay,
Yeah.
and this is a book.
Double.
Yeah, almost double. This is a book both Aubrey and I have read, and not only this book popped off last year, this author popped off last year, and that is none other than Sarah J. Maas's It's a Crescent City House of Sky and Breath. So this is the second book so far in the Crescent City series.
Oh
Wow, this book I could talk about for days, and hopefully we can do a whole podcast on it in the future when we know more. But oh my goodness,
Sarah J. Maas book from here for like probably the next 5 years at least, as long as TikTok is around, Sarah J. Maas's books are going to be number one. Like she does character so well. Like character is her like shining achievement. And that's how you see these. I see TikToks all the time of like them taking these characters and putting them in other situations and doing scripts for them and like matching audios to different characters and Taylor Swift songs to different characters. And it's because we are so obsessed with all of these characters. And this book and this series is no exception. I can still hear the Wound Dannon crown, like sound in my head, just like when I go to sleep at night. But
yes, and and obviously she wrote the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, which if you haven't heard of yet, I don't even know how you found this podcast.
Yeah, how did you find this video?
How did you watch any of our stuff? Just because you must not have Book Talk either. Because just like Taylor Swift, I'm flooded with A Court of Thorns and Roses content. I'm flooded with. Yeah. And my gosh. So, just like those characters, the Crescent City series is no different. And the only reason the second book popped off is because of the famous ending of this book. Talk about an ending for any book. And that is like no spoiler. Everyone knows that the ending of this book is something that you want to work for. And I had a lot of troubles with the first book getting into it. And a lot of people make funny TikTok videos saying like feeling so confused reading this book. But once you get to the second book, it gets the business gets started.
So, I liked the first book more than the second book.
Really?
Besides the ending. This second book,
that's true.
I felt like I was working through this plot. However, I will say that the Crescent City world setting is urban fantasy in a high fantasy setting, which means that they're in a city. They have phones, they have guns, they have cars, they have skyscrapers. It was like whiplash getting into this because I have read Sarah J. Maas's other series, ACOTAR and Throne of Glass, and those are, your traditional high fantasy series where it's like medieval-esque, even though they have like toilets and stuff sometimes. And then getting into this, I was like, what is happening to my fantasy read? These bitches are in a city. This is urban fantasy, but it's high fantasy, and that like totally threw me through a loop.
Yes. I think that's where most people were at.
Yeah. She did an amazing job with it, though. I think, like,
she did.
Reading it, even though they had phones and stuff, like, the things that she chose to capitalize on and the modern stuff that was included, I think was really well balanced with still it clearly being fantasy. So I think there was a good job. I am obsessed with these covers. The Crescent City covers are, like, my favorite covers ever.
And they feel so nice. So they're so matte on the inside. They have beautiful illustrations, and I love these books. I didn't think I would like the urban fantasy, but what I think I can take out of these books, and we're talking about House of Sky and Breath, just because it's number one, is that I feel like because it's in an urban fantasy setting and there's these more in fae and fantasy terms, like new technology things that you would see. I feel like I could relate more to like Bryce.
Yeah.
I could, when she goes out and she has her friends and
Yes.
her like social circles, I'm like, wait, but like I can kind of relate to that.
Uh-huh. Oh, when
And
she
she's a very
when they're flirting and they're taking pictures on each other's phones, like that shit's so cute, and I've done that.
yes, and you know, like her little like she has her girls, she has her friend group, but like
Mhm.
she gets irritated with some of them sometimes, and they fight and they make up, and sometimes in fantasy, and as it should be, it is very epic and it's this huge storyline, something that we wish we could relate to, but it's like literally impossible to.
Mhm.
But in this, it was kind of merging two worlds,
Yeah.
which was whiplash at first. And I will agree, you know, for the second House of Sky and Breath, I feel like that book could have been a lot shorter. Uh, it
Um,
could have been a lot shorter.
mhm.
But with that being said, just make it to the end.
Yeah. If you are a Sarah J. Maas fan, then you probably have had the end spoiled for you. We won't do it, but you probably
No way.
have.
Yeah.
But you're gonna want to get to the end. I think that so much of this book was built on that end and
Yeah.
on the future of what's to come because of that
Yes.
ending. Crescent City 3 comes out in January of 2024. What is it? House of Flame and Shadow,
Shadow.
which is so exciting. I am very excited to get my hands on that book. I am
I know.
positive, I'm telling you right now, when it is 2025 and we are reviewing GoodReads top 10 fantasy 2024 books, it is going to be number one. There's almost no way about it for it not to
Yep.
be. I think even if Brandon Sanderson releases the last Stormlight archive of the first 5 books in 2024, I think they'll go heads to heads, and I think Sarah J. Maas is going to come out winner. I'm so excited for that book.
Yes, I think it's going to be just everything we have hoped and dreamed for, and I'm just so excited. I think this, if not just for the book, but for the impact Sarah has made on the reading community,
Yeah.
I think
Mm-hmm.
she deserves the number one spot for fantasy reads. I mean,
I do.
this was the book series that made, you know, Aubrey and I friends because I was reading it, and she's like,
Yes.
"What are you reading?" She's like, you're reading Sarah J. Maas." I'm like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
So,
I,
oh yes,
I think so many connections have been formed over it. I know so many people who are like, Sarah J. Maas was my way back into reading.
yeah,
And that's such a powerful sentiment. I think any author would want to have that claim, and it's something that can't be denied. I love her.
love her. Yeah, there's nothing really bad I can say about her. But yes,
All right, that is all the time we have left for today. Have you read any of these books? How would you rank these top 10 books? And what do you think is missing?
yes, and as always, let us know what you would like to see from us next. Our DMs are open, our comments are open, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yes. Thank you all so much for joining us, and happy reading.